everyone, and welcome to the Disability Dish, the UML Perspective. My name is Janelle Diaz. This is episode 9. I'm an Assistant Director in Disability Services, and I'm co-hosting with...
Hi, everybody. Jodi, Rachen's Director of Disability Services.
So today we have an exciting topic, disability and intersectionality. And we're also going to be talking about terminology. We have some great guest speakers with us today who we will have introduce themselves in a moment, but we just want to have a little disclaimer, like always, this is just a discussion, conversation. These are our opinions and perspectives on today's episode topic. So I'm going to have everyone kind of get things started. If you can please, or someone first start by saying your name, your role at the university, and your relationship with the word disability, if you have one.
I'll start if that's okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Keith Mitchell, and I'm an associate professor of English here at UMass Lowell. And when I first read the question about my relationship with the word disability, I had to really think to see if I actually had a relationship with the word disability, because disability is such a broad topic. But I think my relationship with the word disability stems from my relationship with a few members of my immediate family. I have a nephew and a niece who have been suffering from schizophrenia and bipolar disorder for decades. They're in their 40s now. Both my nephew and niece began showing signs of their disabilities later in life, I think in their 20s, which from I've come to understand through research is pretty common. They were in their early 20s when their emotional and psychiatric disabilities sort of began to manifest themselves. So, and I remember that initially my two brothers did not understand what was going on with my niece and nephew, but luckily they were both in the military, so they had very good general physicians who then were able to put them in contact with, various resources that could really help them. And it's been really important for them to have those resources, which they still use today.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. And that has come up before. Having access to resources can really make a difference in someone's diagnosis and, independence.
Okay. So, hello. My name is Anshel Isles. Most people call me Shelly. My role at the university is that I'm a senior here, and I'm a liberal arts major, focusing on health sciences and disability studies. So my relationship to the term disability, just like he said, I think it's a broader term for sure. I myself identify as an individual with a disability. I have oculocutaneous albinism, which literally means albinism that affects both the skin and the eyes. And as a consequence, unfortunately, I have low vision. And so yeah, I mean, I know the term well. I'm also doing an internship for people that have brain injury. So yes, I have a very good relationship with the term disability and its broadness as well. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Binnette, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Binnette, and I'm a student at UML. And my relationship to the word disability is that I'm visually impaired. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm McDuffie Clark. I am the Assistant Director of Multicultural Affairs. I really love my job. I am new to UMass Lowell, but I've been doing this multicultural affairs work and working with international students for about 10 years now. And it's really kind of crazy to hear that out loud. But my relationship with the word disability has evolved within that time as well, working with students from all different backgrounds and seeing kind of what their challenges have been, what their successes have been, what their needs are. So it's been kind of an evolving process, and then had me kind of look into my own immediate family. My brother has vision and hearing disabilities, and what that means for him to study. Like he's now first year in college and trying to do community college, and just get a feel for what that is and what that means and how to navigate through it. And here's me, big sister, like, you got to do this and that and the other thing, and get in touch with this person because they'll help you. So it's been really kind of like, I have to check myself of like, yeah, no, he can do it himself, and like, let me back off a little bit, versus like, oh, but I know all the things. So that's kind of been my relationship, professionally and personally, with the word. Thanks.
Okay, and we were just beginning to go for, does anybody feel like they have a relationship with today's topic about intersectionality or terminology or those kind of pieces? I think Anshel was Shelley. We're gonna go with Shelley, right? Shelley was just sharing that you know, that yes, to some extent, but it's complicated, basically, which is what I've decided we probably need to rename this podcast, because it's complicated.
If you just go by Kimberly Crenshaw's definition, then I think you'll be all set.
So maybe we can establish with some of our sort of pros in the room in terms of like, what is the definition of intersectionality to some people? Like, what does that even mean to you when we use this word? Because it's a pretty higher ed pop term, but you know.
So what it means to me is that it kind of validates my experience and everyone's experience, that you're not just kind of defined by one thing. You're not just like your identity as a you know, you are a person who is like Black, female, has a disability or not a disability, or has, you know, whatever, all these things, they're combined, they happen simultaneously. It's how I navigate through the world. And that, to me, in that simplest terms, I not to give it a higher ed kind of definition, but intersectionality means to me all of those things intertwined and how I navigate through the world. And those things are important, and they can't be negated at one point or the other. It was interesting when I went to college, like I felt I had to choose between going to the Women's Center versus the Multicultural Center. And I was like, oh no, what part of who am I right now do I go to? And intersectionality means I don't have to choose. So that's my thoughts on it.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. Like, I have this kind of same definition for me. And I honestly never heard of that word before. Look, this podcast, but I think it's really interesting, and that's so true, that yes, I am a woman, but I'm also a Black woman, and I'm also a woman who has a disability, and they're all one. Like, you can't and shouldn't separate it to me, and they're all part of me, and there's no way I can describe myself with only one word, because it's all part of who I am.
Yes.
Yeah, I think as Shelley and Binnette were talking about, and Marie, that for me, intersectionality means sort of, I look at it, I used to look at it when I was in grad school, looking at it from really Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 coined the phrase, but looking at it in terms of the interconnectedness of the social categories like race and class and gender, sexuality. And then I started thinking about it even in more granular terms. For example, I'm from the South originally, looking at it in terms of what my profession is. And again, all of these things are interconnected. And sometimes one of the quote unquote categorizations takes precedence over the other, and sometimes not. And so intersectionality is important for me. I teach English, and it's something that I really emphasize in my literature classes based upon the kinds of books that I have students read. I want them to read diverse books from diverse sections of categories of people, I guess, in terms of race, sexuality, class, and for my students to have a conversation about these things, because diversity, of course, is absolutely connected to intersectionality. And I think and representation. And I think that's very important for me as a teacher to make sure that when I do teach certain texts, that I try to represent the student population here at UMass Lowell.
We're a super intersectional population, and looking at our new chancellor, who basically lives in every intersectional category you can have, that really kind of represents what we've got going on. And I think what, for me, also like another layer of it then moves into like the power, privilege, rights, politics, oppression category, and how these kind of play into that. But I guess I need to make a pun or a joke that like you really can't dissect the intersect. Was that like too cheesy?
No.
But
No, not at all.
But I just felt like I had to. So
Humor is always appreciated.
yes.
Mhm.
I try to bring laughs in. We have heavy topics, but we like gotta find moments.
Yeah.
Like,
I was
So
going to say,
I think,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Well, I was just going to say, I know that a lot of, especially in fine arts, humanities, and social sciences, I'm not as cognizant about this in terms of the North Campus faculty and the courses that they teach. But in fine arts, humanities, and social sciences, I think most of the departments put an emphasis on intersectionality and put an emphasis on diversity. I'm very proud of the English department. I'm not just saying that because I'm a part of it, but I see what my other colleagues are doing. For example, one of my colleagues, Rebecca is teaching a course this spring that is called 21st Century Feminisms, and it's going to include trans feminism, which I think is pretty new and cutting edge and important. And so those are the kinds of things that, and again, it's not just her, but those are the kinds of issues and ideas that we in the English department are really trying to put out there to let our students know that we hear them and that we appreciate them and we want their voices to be represented.
Because different voices are an asset. Like if we continue to do the same, like assimilate into the thing, we don't grow, and we don't like what are we missing? What are we? I always think about like the first explorers, like if they didn't like keep diving in and seeing like, well, what's in here, what's there, like, but how do you know if you don't keep going? So I would also like I would hope this is happening on North Campus, but there's always room for intersectionality, like especially within the sciences. What are the things that we're missing, like in different countries, in different cultures? Like, what are we not studying? What are the, we just went through a pandemic, but how does it affect these folks versus those folks? Like, that is an important question that we should be asking ourselves, because it's not one box fits all. Yeah,
it comes up a little bit too, like women in STEM. It comes up with first generation in STEM.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Black students in STEM. We have the new Asian American center, which I'm not saying correctly. I apologize. But and sort of focus on some of those pieces and sort of research opportunities. I think are a big one. So it's not as easy for them to design cool, creative curriculums, but I think in terms of at least making sure that they're addressing the students that are sitting in the classroom and sort of their various needs is how they can address it.
And I would just like to add one thing, just kind of piggybacking off of what Keith said not too long ago. So in terms of society, acknowledging intersectionality, I think that would be great if society had adopted this mentality, like, or awareness, I should say, about intersectionality, because maybe it would create less problems, less tension. We would see fewer cases of discrimination, harassment, homophobia, transphobia, anything really. Just, I think society would run smoother if everybody had adopted some awareness of intersectionality, for sure.
You answered our next question, Shelley. So for the rest of our podcast, guys, do you believe society plays a role in our perceptions of what intersectionality is, or how we view intersectionality, or how we, kind of, it was talked about a bit, like how we value certain identities versus others?
I 100% agree with Shelley about the perceptions of intersectionality in our society, and I've heard I've read things and arguments from less progressive folks about the ideas undergirding intersectionality, and sometimes they think it means giving special treatment and consideration to people, not in the majority, which of course is ridiculous. It simply means to treat people equitably by taking into consideration all aspects of who they are as a person. And when Marie brought up the notion of COVID, a lot of those folks who perhaps did not view themselves in an intersectional way, now because a lot of people have a long-term COVID and symptoms, now they have a quote unquote disability. I don't know how the science community is defining that at this point, but now they will begin to see what, if they hadn't thought about it before, now they'll begin to think about what it means to live in intersectionality. And I think that's going to be very important for us to
this has come up a little bit too with that, where there's some theory that we're all temporarily abled. If we consider ourselves abled, then we may be all be considered temporarily abled. You never really know. You could walk out on the street and something could happen. But also with COVID, there were also people that had functioning disabilities that they didn't have to bring into a workplace or a school setting. But then COVID brought up for them a divide, and then they had to move a new section of their identity out more forward and more present, because perhaps they were immunocompromised in a way that hadn't really come up for them before, or there were many other variables, and long COVID is another new one that we'll be bringing up for people as we understand it better in terms of what they're managing.
I don't know if you all remember, but when first at the pandemic, when the vaccines were coming out, and we were saying like, oh well, we're going to do this in this way, where the folks that are most affected are going to go first and things like that. I had colleagues who didn't want it to, like, we had to write in language, you don't have to share when you got your COVID vaccine, or like don't ask anybody when they got their COVID vaccine, because it, like you said, they didn't want, now part of their identity that they may not have needed to like share, they now needed to share because, oh, I really do need to get a vaccine.
Right. And you thought about it. I thought about it, and I've talked about it before, that my disability identity is complicated. I have Crohn's disease, and on most days it's manageable, but it qualified me for like an earlier vaccine. But did I want to take a seat away from somebody else, and those kind of pieces. So that pulls us off the topic a little bit, but it does, what we are often talking about is how that this identity, is a piece of people's lives in all different ways, and how it comes and goes in different people's lives.
Or do like more folks understand now that their identities are intersecting? If you thought that you were kind of more of like whatever the quote unquote norm is, you actually have all these different pieces that shape you, who you are. And that's coming out more and more. And I it's laughable, the backlash against intersectionality, because it really does help more so than hurt. So and also it's been out since the 80s, and why are we mad about it now? That's like a little bit like
my first kind of introduction to it. I feel like when I was either in college or grad school, and I was learning about the concept in a psych program of doing a genogram, which prior to that had been your typical family tree, which was like just lines of people on the family. But the idea of a genogram, bringing in more content, more information, making connections, patterns, and histories, began to bring up different factors on people and different things. And so kind of understand, like when you have to do your own, or you did one with a client, like understanding how complex the web was of one's life, that maybe don't have at the front of your mindset all the time. Yeah, because there's we can toss religion into it. We can toss, we've tossed, and we already talked about gender and sexuality into it. We can toss socioeconomic status. We can talk about that Keith is from the South and we're from the North, and what is that, or somebody who's international, so it isn't even really a definable set of items.
And it has a lot to do with how other people perceive you. Because if
Mhm.
you're from another country or if you're from the South, I know there have been not, it doesn't happen that often anymore, but I know that a lot of times people will question the intelligence of people from the South or make
Mhm.
assumptions
Yeah.
about their political leanings and those
Mhm.
kind of things.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can be problematic. So, yeah.
Yeah, even
But
down
it's also
to
like, sorry, were you saying something?
No, you
I'm
are.
sorry. Okay.
Stephanie.
All right. So I was gonna say like it's like everybody in society like has like different notions about other people, like where they come from, you know, race, gender, um, socioeconomic status. So it's like everybody has these notions, and it's like whether you agree with them or you don't agree with them. It's just it's interesting to hear other people's point of views on different stuff. Like, um, so I know I'm kind of bringing up a rough subject, but when they overturned Roe v. Wade, like you started on social media, how people expressed how they felt about Roe v. Wade. So yeah, I think you see more of it now than ever before, especially like after COVID, during COVID. You saw some views like, you know, people were pretty divided when it came to vaccinations or
Mhm.
getting the vaccines. People were also divided about the mask mandates every state had or you know, just other things too. I know they might be little things now, but it's just when you look now, like, you know, looking back then, it's like, wow, people really had some opinions that I never really knew about. So it was just interesting to hear that stuff. And mainly, you mostly heard it on social media or television. So,
Mhm.
And
The
that can
past
really
4 years.
create, sorry,
Yeah.
that can really create a divide, right?
Mhm.
yeah,
And it
divisiveness.
has. Right. It absolutely has. And I like it, as Shelley was saying, the mask mandates and people debating about whether or not they should have to get the vaccine and those kinds of things. Because we're in the immediacy of it, right in the middle of this sort of historical moment, it's going to take probably decades with historians, people in the medical profession and other disciplines
Mhm.
looking back
Mhm.
and really trying to assess what all of this meant. Like, why were people really so upset about the mask mandates? What was the effect of the sort of the negative rhetoric about getting the vaccines? What was all of that about? And so it's just like, and also Roe v. Wade, of course, people are going to historians and political scientists. They're going to look back and really have to they're going to be the ones to make an assessment of how we dealt with these things. And of course, social media bringing all of that into it. So even in the future is going to be a very interesting time. Sometimes I talk to my students about 9/11, and I'm not sure the ages of the folks here, but sometimes I talk about America or the world in terms of pre 9/11 and post 9/11. The
Mhm.
world was very different pre 9/11. I remember that if you, like, 10 minutes before your plane took off, you could walk right up the runway and you could get on the plane. You didn't have to go through all of the checks and everything.
Mhm.
And I think that folks today, especially the younger people, but people living in this time of COVID and the pandemic, they will look at the world pre-pandemic and post-pandemic.
Yeah.
And that's certainly going to be something that folks are going to really think about in terms of how the world has changed
Mhm.
for particularly, you remember middle schoolers and kindergartners having to put on masks, I mean, all of these kinds of issues.
There was that debate too. So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
For the first half of my son's life, his teachers had like masks on and
Mhm.
like, it could go back and forth. And he was, like it was normalized for him.
Yeah.
And I think about normalized, like you go back and say the pre 9/11 of the movies are like, oh, run to go like catch him on the plane. That does not happen
Say
anymore.
goodbye right at the
no,
gate.
not at all.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
security is strict now with these airports for a
Exactly.
reason.
Really?
But
Yeah.
For a
so
reason.
an interesting thing that I think we're dancing on is sort of that idea of we're going to move on to our next question momentarily, but is that each of these sort of life-defining moments and particularly 9/11 and now the pandemic and things of the pandemic, I think they rose up different identities at different times. Like a 9/11 one, I personally never thought twice about Muslims really in
That's right.
society prior to, and then they, were seen as a very, very certain specific identity, and in our society sort of evoked fear, and many American Muslims were, I have multiple identities here. I'm an American. I was born here,
Yes, yes.
and
Right.
and that didn't necessarily matter in that way. And there was a real intersectional sort of mind like disaster going on there of which identity to dance in. And I think COVID did some of that with certain identities too. It certainly took socioeconomic classes into a different place than if you had a better home to be in when we were in isolation, and you had more comfort, and you had internet, even though your circumstances were really miserable, because we all had miserable circumstances, compared to somebody who had a very different, or they were working at a job where they must come in and they couldn't be safe and they couldn't remain isolated because of their, so that was a category that got super raised up high, and so that I feel like there's always sort of like different levels of identities that are kind of playing a chess game in some way. So bringing it back into the disability centric version of this podcast that we have. So we've done a lot of good society talk. I think we've established a good baseline. So thinking about this intersectionality topic, when we're providing support and inclusion with people of various disabilities, is there something about intersectionality that we can be utilizing and keeping in mind, or, open question.
Absolutely. Like, I think what happens is that there's many more like unfortunate gaps when we talk about folks that are historically underserved, or like not thought to like they're already like at the low level, either socioeconomic status or like race, gender, and so you add on top of a disability and it's just like okay. And so I remember like for my brother, it was kind of harder for folks to actually believe that he had vision issues or hearing issues. They were like, even folks in my own family who did not want to believe like, oh, he's fine. He doesn't need like this or that or the other thing. And so having access or having someone actually like believe that you have like a disability, like to talk about intersectionality, that's generational. That's part of like his, gender, him being male, like we didn't want to think that like, oh, he's less than or weaker. So all of those things came into play just based on his intersecting identities and at a disadvantage, unfortunately. We weren't able to diagnose him until maybe middle school, which that's still a lot of learning for him that it was lost that he could have like if he got there sooner. So those things.
Yeah, I was thinking about this question yesterday, and as several folks on the panel talked about, the intersection of race and disability, and you can add on other identities like sexual orientation, class, and gender. But I think class has a really important part in how we look at and view disability and respond to the needs of people with various challenges. For example, someone who is trans, disabled, and Native American probably would be more at risk for not getting the kinds of medical care and attention that they need and deserve. And I think, if you have a lower socioeconomic class, then more likely you will have more difficulty, say, with accessibility to buildings and those kinds of things in neighborhoods that are lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. So that has a profound effect on one's quality of life, depending upon what you have access to and depending upon your socioeconomic status in your class. And that includes schools, of course. Those schools who are in the wealthier parts of towns and cities certainly will have the money and the resources to help their students far more than those who are in who are in more depressed and socioeconomic areas that don't have these kinds of resources. And again, that affects the ability to learn, the ability to feel confident in oneself, the ability to feel that one can succeed, especially if you know that there are not the kinds of resources, or the attention is not being paid to what you need in order for you to thrive as a student or thrive as a person in a certain environment.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head, Dr. Mitchell, from the beginning of this podcast. Access to resources can really define someone's experience and success as an overall individual, especially when they have various identities that they belong to.
And at its core and its baseline, there's access to resources, and there's even just like knowledge of and education of, and somebody who belongs to certain subsets within an intersectional identity, they're going to get more education. They're going to be treated differently in a way where somebody's going to say, that there's, there's resources for that, or somebody else may be spending their time not knowing that there are resources for that.
Or even going through the process of navigating those resources, and
Yeah.
all of the layers that come with accessing different
School
resources.
systems that have the time to do neuropsych testing for students, and or have the time to prepare their students for what to expect in college with a disability, and those sorts of things. That happens a lot.
I always say sometimes my disability is my second full-time job. It's just kind of keeping up with day-to-day resources and supports. I just feel like I just never have enough time. It just becomes sometimes extremely overwhelming. And I'm someone that comes from a middle class family, and I have access to certain resources. I can't imagine someone who doesn't.
And we talk about that. I talk about that a lot with students too, especially this time of year where they may even have a major where the expectation is you have to take certain clustered classes together to progress through, and you may need to be taking this much at a time or whatever. And sometimes I say, but managing your health or your mental health or whatever, that's occupying that's more than a class in itself right now for you. And so 4 classes
goes above anything else.
Yeah. What'd you say, Shelley?
I said I think it should go above everything else in life, to be honest with you.
We think so too, but it doesn't. Often people are saying, but I am supposed to be here as a college student. I'm supposed to progress. I'm supposed to graduate at a certain time. I'm 24 and I haven't met XYZ goal or whatever, are those things. Exactly. Society. Parents, race, society, I don't know, things that we tell ourselves, the comparison to peers.
Yeah. Like, I totally agree. Like, sometimes you have like that pressure. Like, for me, I think I have to give 110% in everything that I do because I have a disability, because I can't see, but I want to be able to be on the same level like everybody else who hasn't, plus being like a woman, plus having albinism. Like, it's hard to compete with everybody else and not having, sometimes I feel like I don't want to see my disability as my weakness, but other people do see it as my weakness, but I want to show, and that's why I feel like I have to go that extra mile, even if I don't necessarily have to, because people say, yeah, you don't have to push yourself, but then at the same time I feel like I have to push myself to show you that I deserve to be here and that I have a place here.
That's a lot to prove.
The pressures that society puts on us.
The pressure.
That's what it feels like to me some days. I'm not gonna lie. It's this is the college has been a rocky road for me personally, just academically, not socially, but more academically than anything else. But and like Binnette said, it's like not everybody's gonna understand your disability. all throughout my schooling career, my disability has been like subject to a lot of misunderstandings with professors. Like they'll think I just slack off or that I'm not motivated, but that is entirely false. Like I came here to work hard, of course, meet people along the way, and just to get a degree so I can be successful in life. But it's hard because not all the professors, actually a good portion of professors aren't willing to accommodate, or they're not willing to understand or really take the time to listen to an individual. And that to me is just it's just frustrating because all I really want to do is just succeed. But like it's like I put in the work, I'm committed, like I'll do whatever it takes, but I just don't get the result. Like that's what I've been seeing a lot of throughout my academic career here. So it's unfortunate, but at the same time it's good because I understand myself better. And I think my only advice to anybody that's in my situation, or even like Binnette, or like any other student here at this university that has disability, and academics, is kind of a struggle. I'm here to tell you that it's not how the outside world works. Like, no, you're not going to be given a test. You're not going to be given a paper or anything. You're just going to go out, just work hard, and that's all that's all it's going to pay off. But, your grades, papers, assignments, that shouldn't define you. And I'm not saying, don't try hard, but, please always try hard. But, none of that stuff is going to matter. Grades should not define you. So you shouldn't beat yourself up over it, is what I'm trying to say.
I hear you.
There are
Yeah,
different structures where people excel.
that's right.
Yeah.
College is a tough structure.
Yeah.
It just is.
Oh, it's tough, all right, and
Yeah.
costly. Can I say
Yeah.
costly?
I think one of the challenges that many instructors have, those who want to help students with disabilities to be as successful as possible, is that a lot of students don't want to identify as having a disability. And so they don't want to go to disability services to get the proper paperwork so that we can then make the accommodations. And that can be very frustrating. I'm sure it's frustrating for the student, but I think it is also as frustrating for the professor or the instructor, because we want to help. Most of us do. And I'm sorry that Shelley has had, and others have had, situations where professors are just not understanding that about student situations. But I think a lot of the professors do want to help as much as they possibly can, but we can't really do anything until a student identifies, it goes to the disability services to officially identify as someone with a disability. So,
And that that was going to be my next point to bring up, was the problems with self-advocacy. So
yeah.
it's just,
And we see that beyond just the
that's a skill.
disability issue, right?
That's a skill.
Self-advocacy is just
So
across
like,
the
I
board.
mean, I really had to do it in middle school and all throughout high school, and even now I'm still doing it. I'd like to say that I'm better at it. Not perfect. Nobody's perfect at anything, but I'm getting better. I'm, not 100%, but I'm getting better at advocating for sure, and just, speaking about what I need in order to succeed, and what the professor should know, and just so they have a better understanding, and maybe like come the next semester we can hit the ground running.
Right.
So
Because, sorry,
no, go ahead.
because I feel like sometimes it's also on us, like people with a disability, to remember that people can't read our minds. Like people can't look at our face and tell like what we need. We have to speak up for ourselves and let people know what they can do, because maybe they want to do it, but if we don't advocate for yourself, they're not able to do that because they can't tell. For me, for example, most people don't know that I'm visually impaired and that my eyes are really, really bad, because many people wear glasses. So they're not able to tell. So if they do something wrong, then it's not because maybe they want to, but because they don't know. So speaking up is very important. And I had to learn that for myself too. And yeah, just had that.
Yeah, it's definitely a skill for sure to be able to have the confidence or the audacity to speak up especially like to somebody like that's like in a higher ranking position. Like I just think it's, and then you got always have the professors that are on an insane power trip, but that's just me. I'm just
Do you
just
think that
speaking my
there's
mind here.
anything intersectional about self-advocacy that makes things easier or harder or more
Oh, definitely.
complicated? You know, thinking about that or even your own
For
experience.
sure. For sure. There's definitely some intersectionality pieces. For one, I think it has to do, I think it would mostly tie into gender and race. So like I'm just gonna kind of go off use the example here of people that are of color maybe.
Mhm.
Maybe they're kind of like, and I feel terrible for saying this, but they're seen as less superior. Like maybe like society's more apt to help somebody out who is white versus somebody who's of color. Um, Unfortunately, we're kind of seeing a pattern where history is kind of repeating itself. And you see it like especially like with like law enforcement and stuff too. So
Kelly, I know that it's always so hard because like these conversations are like, these are facts though. Like
Yeah.
they're
yeah,
like it
Yeah.
happens every day, and that's like part of
like I said, I apologize if I'm bringing up some rough rough topics,
That's
but
what we're here to do right now.
That's
yeah,
right.
just
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
speaking our minds here.
Yeah. And you brought up, you know, Roe versus Wade and those kind of pieces, and you know, that's a gender thing that suddenly got put back onto a plate that, you know, seemed like it was in another room. And
that's why you gotta like keep because you think something's okay and it's really not.
Yeah.
So you always have to be and talk about intersectionality depending on like where you're at. You always feel like you have to keep, like you said, Binnette, like going to prove yourself, like, no, actually this is important. No, this is actually like very valuable. No, this is actually an asset. And it feels like a constant, like, and I saw your question in the chat, Janelle, but like advocacy, definitely. Where is our focus all the time? And sometimes you can be so focused on this piece, and we get a lot of people going, and they're all on board, and we're here, and then all of a sudden, like, oh, we forgot about voter rights and like Roe versus and all that. And so we thought that was okay, and now we have to keep going back and forth. So what the interesting thing in my mind is that it's all related. So like what my struggle seems to be just, you know, Black women, that's it. Like that's what I go through all the time. Actually, no, it actually is affected by what international students go through or what folks that, you know, I wouldn't even, because with disabilities or trans folks, all of our struggles like are the same. And I will also include my white allies. It's the same because you have all these things that are shaping us together in society, and we only get one earth. And we are constantly bombarded with the fact of science, time's a ticking. So we have to figure out how we're gonna like work together at this point, this base level of like, I know we come from this place, we have this history, that history, but knowing and having more knowledge and being able to like have the confidence to speak up is
and establishing just basic humanity and respect will, you know, would be a nice baseline to have, right? It's just we are, you know, we are people, and you know, we're human, and that all brings us to the same table. But yeah, and then there's a thing about advocacy when, I mean, Benny, you were kind of really saying like, I also feel too like that's exhausting, right? So let's acknowledge the inevitable too, that like that's a fight, and that's a fight that you have to fight, and that matters to you and is important and gets you results, but it's exhausting. And then there are people that just either they get that major mental wellness sort of umbrella that comes over and doesn't really stop the rain, or they, you know, they back down from advocating because it's tiresome every day, you know, to have to explain it and you know, and push and push and push and push. And so hard too.
There's times where it's absolutely necessary though.
That's a lot of it's a lot of energy expended which could be
Mhm.
expended in other things like your academics or your social life and other things.
Yeah.
But as Shelley was saying, it's absolutely necessary
Yeah.
because, as Binnette was saying, people can't read our minds, right? And so we have to advocate for ourselves in order to get the things that we want, the things that we need.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
So-
like
go ahead. Final
I
thought.
said, okay, final thought. I'll make it quick. I know this might sound a little redundant, but again, with the whole like pushing and pushing, it's like it can be harder. Like just like it can't be one time. Like if a professor's not willing to understand, just to really push and push and push. Like if you push and push and push, they'll eventually understand you, and then yeah, maybe they'll follow through, hopefully. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. Just
Or finding other avenues or other allies or other
Yeah.
ways, so,
Yeah, like I said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
apologize if that sounded redundant, but
No, it's good. So we actually, Janelle and I were talking behind the scenes and we decided that we're gonna need to do a part B, either with this group or just in a future podcast of like the terminology stuff, because we
Yeah.
did want to talk about person first language versus like disability first language, but
Right,
this is so
right.
vibrant that we were like, let's roll with this. So
Yeah.
stay tuned for a part B.
I'm
But
glad
so-
you mentioned that part B because you know, I'm working on an article that I'm writing an article for a novel that I've been reading, but to publish. But some of the characters have disabilities, and I had to educate myself on what's the right terminology.
Yeah.
Right.
yeah, for
You
sure.
know,
The jargon.
right. You go to there's a government website, and then there's many other different websites, and most of them say the same thing, but then there are some differences within those various websites in terms of the correct terminology to use for various kinds of disabilities. So anyway.
Yeah, and it's intersectional in and of itself in its
Yeah.
own way. And you know, I was writing some paperwork this week with some of my colleagues on like dietary stuff, and there's a religious versions of diets, and I was trying to even figure out like, does house of worship like really cover all ways that where somebody might be connected to, and is clergy the right term or
Right,
not?
right.
I'm Jewish, I don't even know, and
Right.
so and so a whole different intersectional component of things where I was like, I know I could talk about disability diet stuff, but as far as the religious section on this document we're working on, like I had to kind of dig into some unknown knowledge as well.
Yeah.
and ask around. So yeah, I mean, the good point, and I think we can do our final question is, we have to keep educating ourselves on areas that we're not as familiar with, and that way we can stay kind of educated, understanding, empathetic people who at least are open to asking the questions and not just thinking this is the way it is, right?
Yeah.
So now take
Okay.
us home.
Yeah, final question. So after this conversation, what is the takeaway that will stick with you? And has anything changed about how you feel, either as a person with a disability or as an ally, about disability stigma? So a takeaway that will stick with you, and has anything changed about how you're feeling about disability stigma?
I think a takeaway that I've gotten from our conversation is how important intersectionality is to disabilities, right? And in conversations around disabilities, something that I hadn't really thought about before, right? But how important it is for our UML community, for our society, for the world, to really think about intersectionality, and to think about people in terms of a wholeness, everything that makes up who that person is, in order for us to have better relationships with each other and a better understanding of each other.
Thank you. Does anyone else feel like they have a takeaway they want to share, or new thoughts on disability stigma?
So I took away a lot, like that it's really important, that intersectionality is really important. And I've learned a lot. I haven't been talking a lot throughout this process because I've been listening, and like I was trying to understand and get more insight. And that's a good thing as well. Sometimes you just have to
Yeah.
listen. I came here thinking maybe I'm gonna say a lot, but I didn't, and that's totally fine
Mhm.
because I
Mhm.
learned so much.
Yeah.
Mm.
And yeah.
Thank you.
I think I mostly took away like how awesome disability services is and how like great I feel as a partner with this office and the home care. And then just thinking too, like, it's been an interesting day because I was actually like I had folks from transfer school come for a field trip to like kind of learn about the Multicultural Affairs office and like just how they see themselves here at MCC. And that's different because like to that point, you're like, I'm 24 and I'm coming to college. What's that standard? And so like that also is like blowing my mind of like how I can better be like an ally, a coach for students, and not to read their minds, but maybe probing questions, maybe to educate myself more a little bit, not to get too much into folks, but like maybe to like what are some things that I can do to like make myself a little bit more approachable so that people can disclose to me, and then I can help more so like that's what I got away from here is yeah, how can I be more of a better ally? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes. Shelley, you have any final thoughts on this?
No, not really. It was great to listen to what everyone else had to say, and I know I threw my stuff out there too. So yeah, just
Thank
think
you.
this was a pretty good podcast.
Oh yeah.
Good.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.